Hello, everybody. Welcome this evening to our Family Wellbeing Community Workshop Series. My name is Sarah Taylor, and I have the pleasure of being here this evening with you. I am an implementation coach with Safe Schools and Wellbeing. And I am going to get my colleague, who is also here with us, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Darnell, and I am a social worker that is attached to the Safe Schools and Wellbeing team. And we are delighted to have all of you join us, and we are delighted to have our guests join us to share their knowledge. And yeah, looking forward to the session, but I will turn it back over to Sarah.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have a spectacular presentation coming up this evening for you by our lovely guests. We have Holly and Tim with us, and they are going to be speaking on navigating healthy conversations, empowering parents in a digital age with relationships and identity. So we are very excited to have you here. If we would like to turn the presentation over to you now. Also, you will see that there is a Q&A available. You can ask questions there. We will be getting to them near the end of the presentation. And I believe that is it. So if you would like to get things going, Holly, that would be great.
In case people aren't aware, sorry, that picture, the bar, the Q&A should be across the top of your screen. There should be a Q&A thing. So if you just put the questions in there, then one of us will, hopefully, because I'm not being able to see them, but one of us will be able to see them.
One of us will.
We got this. So sorry, thanks.
That's so great. Teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work, right? So yeah, so I'll start us off tonight. And hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Tim Smuck, and I am the Executive Director for Changing Ways. And so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be a part of this incredible initiative. So it's very humbly that I'm able to be here on behalf of our agency, and to have Holly join us as well, who is an absolute star staff of ours. So you're going to be hopefully, well informed, have some really thoughtful and reflective information tonight, and then hopefully be able to continue the conversation. That's really our goal for today. So I'm going to open us up and just talk to you a little bit about Changing Ways, who we are and what it is that we do. And so we've been a not-for-profit that has been in our community for quite some time, over 36 years. And Changing Ways was really developed as a very unique agency that was looking at, when there was a lot of domestic violence charges happening in our community, our province, our communities wanted to do something different. And so what was created out of that was some programming, some counseling-based programming to work with those who have caused harm within intimate partner relationships, and seeing how we can work to try to change behaviors. And that's really been our agency's focus, specialized focus, for over that 36 years. So we're a very rare agency. There's not many like us in the province, even nationally, that really focuses on intimate partner violence, primarily working with the individual who has caused harm. And we know close to 90% of all the individuals that come to our office who have been charged identify as men. So we always, start from that place of our specialty is primarily working with those who identify as men. and not coming at that from a place of shaming and blaming, but working to hold this incredible balance. And I really call it the secret sauce of our agency, which is how do we hold those who we serve accountable for the harm they have caused first and foremost, without question, but how then do we also work to build trust, connection, and understanding as to where that harm came from, so we can work to try to change that behavior. So we always say that, your past, whether it be, different forms of trauma, that may be an understanding as to why some harm has happened, but it's not an excuse. So we have to hold that accountability. So that's really our purpose. And you can see here, we service primarily over 700 men a year and 200 women a year as well. And so our agency, yes, like we primarily service those who have caused harm. And again, those being primarily those who identify as men, but we work in a holistic way. So we really try to work from a family first approach. How can we ensure that we're leading from a place of being survivor focused? And, a survivor meaning the person that has experienced that harm. Like, how are we working from their perspective? And how are we working to understand everyone else that may have been harmed with that, whether that be children, family, close friends, the community as a whole. That's the lens that our agency really tries to work with, is that holistic approach to really address this issue. So next, we're going to just talk a little bit about kind of where we do our work. So Changing Ways operates primarily out of London. That's our headquarters, if you would say. But we also service Chatham, Kent, and St. Thomas and Elgin. So I think it's a really important point, because our agency knows really, really well how to serve urban and more rural individuals. We know those that live in a rural context are often at higher risk of intimate partner violence and family violence. So it's something, having that experience working in those communities, it's something we certainly take a keen look to, because there's just less services overall, right? And so how do we build trust differently in rural communities, and how do we go about our work just slightly different with that? So this slide is great because this is our agency's mission. So this is why we do what we do. This is why we're so excited to be welcomed into this space tonight by Sarah and Christy. And, a huge shout out to both school boards for creating this initiative, right? I mean, this is a great step forward, and we want to continue to support this as best we can. So, well, again, why we come to work is because we want to disrupt violence and abuse and create safety for all, really, right? For everyone that's in our community, that's our primary focus. And we do believe gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, we believe, is preventable. I mean, that's what's so exciting too about coming to work, is the fact that, we really think that we can work to prevent this. And this initiative tonight, we hope is a big step in that prevention journey, to support all of you as parents, to support the school board in how to have some of these conversations. How do we support our younger folks in navigating some of these tricky waters in tricky times? Okay, so just quickly, the programs that we offer. So at Changing Ways, we have 4, what I would say, core programs. The first being our partner assault response program. So that's the court mandated program for those that have been charged with domestic violence offenses. So that's the core work that we do, and that's a 12-week group counseling psychoeducational program that our specialized staff offer and work with. And so throughout that 12 weeks, we're talking about really change behavior, right? And how do we build new tools to continue on in changing that behavior and acknowledging the harm that's been caused. Our second big program is called our Women's Intervention and Support Program. And I love this program because in Ontario, there's domestic violence charges are mandatory, meaning that police officers, there's a mandated piece for police officers to lay charges, which has some unintended consequences at times, leading to some women being charged when we know that oftentimes women are responding to whether that be coercive control or resisting to abuse when some charges are laid. So we have a program that really looks at working with women in a very different way, taking a gendered lens to that work, helping to ensure safety is paramount, but also working to understand how we can go about navigating healthier relationships. So that's a wonderful program that we're really, really proud of. Our next program is called Caring Dads. This is a program where you don't see a lot of services for dads, and our agency is really big on how can we provide more services for dads. That can be it's a real hard job sometimes. And so this is a program where we look to work with fathers that have exposed their children to domestic abuse, right? And how can we sit down and say, okay, you know, there's been some harm that's been caused, and how do we work to come back to child-centered parenting? How do we rebuild healthy relationships with mom? And how do we go about really caring about that family lens and again, change those behaviors? And then the last program we have is our voluntary program called Being the Change. And this is, again, another really specialized program in our community that not many communities have, where any male identifying individual over the age of 18 can call up Changing Ways and say, I need some help. You know, you may be leaving a relationship, or your current relationship is not going very well, or you want to try to change some patterns that have happened in the past. And this is really that space. It's another group counseling space to come in, learn some new tools, reflect on your past, and be able to say, okay, we can work to do differently, and really work to, whether it be break cycles or learn, you know, kind of support your children differently, or and of course have healthier relationships moving forward. So that's kind of the gamut of Changing Ways. We're really proud of all of these programs, and so at the end, our info will be there. And if you have any questions around our programming, don't hesitate to reach out at any time as well. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's get into the fun. I'm going to tell us about our objectives, and then I'm going to stop talking because you've already heard too much from me, and I'll pass it over to the amazing Holly. So we really have 4 core objectives today. The first one being is that we want to have this conversation about how can we support parents really understanding, you know, that tricky path of working to better understand where our children are at, the path they're walking around, relationships, and how they're developing as an individual and being impacted by society, right? We know there's a lot going on, whether that be social media, whether that be in all different corners of our society right now around defining whether that be toxic masculinity, whether that be unhealthy relationship pieces. So that's first and foremost. And then we really want to go into how can we help you build tools to foster those conversations, to really come at it from a way that supports parents and caregivers, but also works to keep those situations safe and nimble. So that's I think a really important piece. And then tactics. We're going to be talking about, you know, how can you, you know, what are some ways when those conversations are tough or get hard, you know, what are some ways you can try to come at them from different angles? And then the last thing we're going to talk about is really about unhealthy beliefs that we're seeing in the field that we believe really pose a risk to children's mental, emotional, and physical safety. And so that's kind of how we're going to end it. And then, of course, we would love to hear any questions you have. So I have said enough. I will toss it over to Holly.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. A very good explanation of our services as well. And so I just wanted to kind of, before we get into defining identity and all the things that go into it, we wanted to talk a little bit because last month, February, was Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And unfortunately, there is still a perception that violence doesn't happen until adulthood. And so it's important to know, and this is from a Canadian study of grade 9s and grade 10s across Canada, that 1 in 3 teens have either experienced dating violence. This could be physical, emotional, this could be psychological violence, but either used it or experienced it. So also we know that some teens are identifying as, yeah, I've used some of these unhealthy abusive behaviors. And we also know that 17.5% of youth are experiencing this online. And specifically, they're experiencing online sexual harassment. And so this is just really important for us to note because, again, one of the themes in today's presentation is that society and life changes really quickly. And a lot of that is due to what we're seeing on social media and kind of that ever presence of information that we can get with just a phone, right? We can Google almost anything. And so just to kind of call attention to the fact that this does happen, and that's why it's so important we start talking to our kids really early on about what safe relationships look like and also what safety online looks like, while still allowing them to kind of explore and find who they are. I also wanted to bring some information from a study that was done in the US. This was a study actually done by the Sesame Workshop. So I didn't know this until a few years ago, but Sesame Street has the biggest research team in North America, or at least one of the biggest, for child development. And so they have some really, really incredible resources. And the next slide is a link to get some of those resources to their website, specifically for children 10 and under. They have guides on talking to children about almost anything, including addiction, incarceration of a parent, family dissolution. So it's just an incredible resource. They did a survey with parents and with teachers. And so this question was to parents: how comfortable are you talking to your children about some of these categories of identity that they had identified? So we see that most parents say, I feel very comfortable navigating conversations about the country of origin, gender, family makeup, race, religion, social class. But what we also see is that then they ask, like, with these conversations, how often do you discuss each? And the purple and the dark green at the bottom here is rarely or never. Right? And so we're seeing that religion comes up often or sometimes, which makes sense because probably early on we are involving our children in religious rituals and conversations. Gender also comes up fairly often. And I'll say this again when we get to development, but this also makes sense because usually gender is something children start to notice very early in life because there are some clear distinctions physically sometimes in how children are taught about gender. But this is still a high percentage of parents saying, I never or rarely have these conversations, even though I might be comfortable having them. And when they ask, how aware is your child of the differences between them and others because of identity? The blue is extremely or very aware, and the lighter blue, this tealy color, is sometimes aware. So we're seeing that a lot of children, like a very high percentage of children, are aware of their identities and how they impact them in the world, but the conversations are not happening very frequently, even if maybe we have the comfort level with that topic. And so this was a question to teachers, and it says, discuss, like, are these conversations part of a lesson plan, or does it just happen? Like, how often? So again, that green and blue is rarely or never. We're seeing that sometimes is one of the biggest categories, but again, not for things like social class or religion, which are probably fairly divisive conversations. So people probably try to avoid them in a classroom. What this tells us is that children are where it's happening. People might have some information on the topics, but it's not being brought to children very consciously, right? And so this is really important to think about, because that means we might have to take the initiative in starting those conversations, because it might not be happening at school, and it might not even be happening at home the way that we think it would come up naturally. And this is the resource that I promised, so I'll leave this up for a second. This is a QR code, so you can pull up on your phone and scan this QR code. It'll bring you to the Sesame Street website. You can also Google Sesame Street, and you'll see along the top it says resources. It has a few different tabs, and it's also a really fun website. So I really strongly encourage us going there and taking a look at some of their cool resources. So hopefully everyone had a chance to get that. I will have some other resources coming up. So just so everyone knows, you can have your phone handy and you can scan some of these. And I assume everyone's getting a copy of the PowerPoint, but there will definitely be a record. So you can always scroll back. So let's talk about identity formation. Like, what are we even talking about? So identity is the way that we see ourselves, how we would describe ourselves to people. It's almost like that inner voice, and it's often formed through our interactions and our experiences. And just to note, this does also include what people tell us, what we hear, what we see. So our identity is formed through us going through the world and experiencing life, but also through content that we're consuming, again, on TV, through other people. And just as Tim said, identity isn't just how I see myself, it's how I see myself in the world. How do I fit in? Where do I fit in, right? And what does that mean for me? We know that identity kind of comes from social factors, but then also individual thinking, right? We think about our identity, we challenge our identity. And usually when we're talking about identity as that umbrella term, identity, we can think of it like a label, carries a meaning, often characterized by certain characteristics of a person, certain beliefs, certain values, or certain behaviors. So when someone has an identity, it is actually connected to more root things within us, like our personal belief systems. And that's why identity is really important for us to start thinking about. Identity, though, is a very broad term, and we have all sorts of identities in society. So it could be a cultural identity. I'm Latin, I'm Irish, I'm Canadian, I'm a second generation Canadian. When we say those things, we tend to have expectations and assumptions about what that means. And so that kind of ties back to the values and the beliefs of that identity. This could be gender identity, which we will touch on a little bit more specifically down the road, but this could be identifying as a man, as a woman. This could also be identifying outside of that binary. So those identities, but also you'll probably notice, especially with your kids, they have hobby specific or role specific identities. So I'm a gamer, I'm a musician, I'm an artist. And when someone says that, it comes with a belief about who they are, how they fit in the world, and what's expected of them. Right? Same thing with I'm a good student. Someone who says I'm a good student, they probably study certain ways, show up to school in certain ways, hold themselves to certain standards. So it's important to know that our identity is often a lot of these different identities meshed together. And that is something really important for us to know, because sometimes people get really focused on one part of their identity without considering how all these fit together. So what does it mean to be a good student and a gamer, right? How do you navigate those two identities together? When we're talking about identity, it's really helpful for us as people to know our identity, because it allows us to think more critically about the world and what the world is telling us. So for example, if I identify as a good student and I might not feel like I fit in at certain places, like maybe the popular table or something like that, right? But it also allows us to think, is this thing that I'm seeing or hearing or experiencing, is it okay? Is it right? Because I might also identify as a caring person, an empathetic person, and I might encounter something that seems really harmful to other people or to myself. if I have a good idea of what I value, I can look at that a lot more critically. Maybe I value honesty. And so when I'm in a situation where someone is dishonest, it helps me to really think, is this a situation that is helping me grow? Is this a situation that's safe for me? It also helps us appreciate ourselves as multifaceted, meaning we have lots of identities and they change and they grow. And this is really important because in life, we should be changing and growing to some extent, right? We're always learning new things. And when we know all the different ways we identify as a person, again, it just helps us think more critically about where we fit in the world, right? What we need in this world. So when we know that, we can find like-minded people. If we are really, really into sports, we can find sports associations. If we're really into academics, we can find academic programs or people. But it also tells us where we might be safe and where we might not be safe. Unfortunately, certain identities do place certain people in more risky situations. So back to those stats I shared at the beginning, that same study that found 1 in 3 Canadian children, or youth, I should say, are experiencing or using dating violence also found that it's more prevalent in certain communities. So this is racial minority communities, immigrant status communities, communities that are not on our gender binary, so like our LGBTQ plus community, and even our disabled community. So children who are in some way a minority are also probably thinking about where they're safe and what that actually means to be safe. So it's just something for us to really think about because it can help our children think about where they are and how it's impacting them. And when we feel really confident in our self-identity and what we believe in, it's a lot easier for us to set boundaries with people, to recognize unhealthy situations, and also to ask for what we need. Because if we know what we need, it's a lot easier to tell people. But sometimes that's hard to know, especially if we're trying to figure out who are we. So with that of identity, it's important that we honor our child's identity. And what I mean by that is that we are open to listening to them, opening to learning about that, and supporting them when we can. It doesn't mean that we have to accept everything they say without questioning, but it does talk, we do want to talk about, are we questioning in a way that's non-judgmental and that helps them critically think, or are we just telling them what to think? Right? And so likely identities will grow and change. I used to be a skater boy is how I told everyone I was a skater boy because Avril Lavigne, okay? I no longer identify that way. I've never even been on a skateboard. It also helps us accept them as people, right? The fact that they are individuals with their own thoughts and beliefs and experiences, and that can help them feel safe when they're interacting with us. Because even if we don't fully get it or we have different beliefs, if we're willing to accept that they have their own and that we can talk about those respectfully, that creates a safer space for some dialogue. And also it helps us guide them to critically think about themselves. This is where I say that we don't have to blindly accept things. Asking questions to our child helps them think really critically about, well, is this actually, like, do I actually identify that way? Or is it just something I think kind of fits, right? And what fits and what doesn't fit. So for all those reasons, that's why we think it's important to have those conversations. So just quickly, I'm going to go over some developmental stages because my understanding is this can be parents anywhere from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. And the good news is we can do identity formation at all the stages. It just looks a little bit different. So when I'm talking about like developmental stages, this is encompassing cognitive development, so like our brain development, our social development, so learning social cues and having emotional intelligence, language, as well as physical development. So kind of all of those things together at each stage. So first we start with our adorable babies, right? And they come out and we give them a pink blanket or a blue blanket. We buy them certain toys, we give them a certain name. So from 0 to 18 months, this is really where children are learning about the world through physical touch, right? That is their main sensor that they have. So they're learning through physical touch. And usually this also involves learning by watching facial expressions or tones. So children, as especially they progress to closer to 18 months, can probably pick up on our tone if we're angry or if we're happy because we're using a different tone. When we meet our children at 0 to 18 months, play and physical touch, like physical play, doing enrichment activities with physical things, this really helps create a strong bond for parents. And we have seen in studies that that strong bond helps in some of the later stages because it kind of creates a baseline of some of the safety in a relationship. Again, that can be formed at each of these stages. It is never too late. But at this stage, sometimes parents think their child is not forming an identity, but actually we're teaching our child that they can be safe with us, which helps them later feel safe in general in being themselves. And so that's really what we're aiming for that age and stage. As they get older, so that 18 to 3 months, now they're learning through play. So this is often where we see kids play act roles. Maybe they're their favorite job, like they're a fireman or something like that. But we'll also often see children play house a lot. And this will tell us about some of the things they have picked up. From 5 and under, their brains are sponges. And we might start to see them do things that we never thought they even saw happen. And it could be from us, it could be from movies, TV, it could be from a lot of sources. And so at this stage, we're probably not having in-depth conversations about identity, but they are probably starting to ask us questions. They probably are identifying things based on what they can physically see and some of those roles they've been taught, right? So I know my niece and nephew have started asking really awkward questions around close to 3 in public, like, why is that person in a wheelchair? Why do they have long hair but they're a boy? So we might start to see some of those questions pop up, and answering those questions and playing games with our kids allows them to explore their interests and start thinking about the world a little bit differently. So at this stage, we are probably using pretty plain language, right? We shouldn't really be getting into technical terms, but we also can start giving them some of the words that they can use, right? So I'd say that person has a disability, they can't walk, so they use that wheelchair for this, right? So we can kind of explain those things starting around this age. We're going to see that become a little bit more accessible between 3 to 5, which is our next kind of developmental stage. At this stage, kids start learning their personal preferences, and they likely are going to voice what they like and what they don't like. Not always in the best way. This could be a tantrum, throwing the broccoli or something. But sometimes, especially if we started giving them the words early enough, they might be able to use some more complicated language in explaining this. This is also where children can usually be given options with parameters. Like, do you want to clean this up by yourself, or do you want to clean this up with my help, right? So we're giving them kind of directed options, but what this is doing is starting to develop the part of our brain that makes decisions. And so even though they're within parameters, what we're doing is giving kids some confidence in their ability to make choices. This is also where we usually can start to explain the rationale for things, like why we have certain routines. And where we can, it's really great at this stage if we can start involving our kids in those decisions. Again, this might be some fairly low-level things. We're probably not asking them about their bedtime, but we might ask them about things like what they want to eat, what they want to play, where they want to go for the day. And again, that might be within parameters. Do you want to go to the park, or do you want to go to the backyard, right? Those kind of choices. Giving them this self-control also helps children start to learn to emotionally regulate. So up to 5, we see a lot of brain development in our emotional sectors. And so when we say to children, like, are you sad? Do you want to take a break? What we're doing is we're actually teaching them to identify an emotion and identify a coping technique. So talking things through with children is actually really helpful for them at this stage. Then we go to the 6 to 12s. Okay, this is really where we're going to see personal interest. So it's not really preferences. Now they're having interests, things they're digging into. They're checking out books from the library. Maybe they're playing games related to this. So we're going to see this is where some of our interests start to develop. We're also making more connections with friends in the outside world. And this is really important to know because when we talk about identity formation, we're especially around 6 to 12, we are involving a lot more people now. They're getting exposed to more people, to more ideas, and maybe to more sources of information like online. So this is probably where we start to see more independence come in, and sometimes it can happen really rapidly at this stage of development. And that brings us into our teen years. Teen years are full of a lot of changes. They go through puberty, so their body is changing, their hormones are changing. And this is a time of exploration. They're getting increasingly independent. Now they maybe go to the school bus by themselves. They set their study schedule, maybe as they get to high school, things like that. And so what we're seeing is that there might be some interest in sexual relationships. There's more peer involvement and also usually more focus on peers. Maybe we have some parents of teens in the audience and there's just this stage where they don't want to hang out with us as much, right? And that is pretty natural when it comes to development. This is also where we'll probably start to see some intersecting identities. So now people might identify, so maybe in earlier years, around 3 to 5 or 6 to 12, we might identify as a big brother or a little sister or a little brother. But now we're going to see other things too about being a student in their peer group. Are they a leader? Are they a follower? All these terms start coming up for kids, and actually it can almost be like information overload. And so this is really how children are finding themselves getting ready for adulthood, that next stage of life. So keeping that in mind, every child is an individual and every child develops a little bit differently. And some children develop quicker in some aspects than others. And so we really encourage meeting kids where they're at. And what we mean by that is using language and examples that make sense for that particular kid and teaching them in ways that make sense for them. Not every kid is going to want to sit there and listen to you talk about something. Some kids are going to want to play while you talk, or they're going to want to watch a movie about it. Not all kids are going to understand all the words that we're using. So even when you have siblings, right, maybe you have multiple children, I know most parents with multiple children tell me it was very different, every child, right? And so it's really thinking about what is my kid's skill level, what is their understanding level, and how can I talk to them in a way that makes sense. We really also encourage co-creating rules to help set healthy boundaries and reciprocal dialogue, meaning that your child can tell you if they agree with it, if they don't agree with it. And this is a really good way to start teaching them conflict resolution, right? Where we have a goal, we know the parameters that we're willing to work within, and we ask them how they can accomplish some of those goals too, and the importance of it, because not everything is going to seem important to kids that seems important to us, right? This doesn't mean about everything, right? We might have some things that are non-negotiable, but again, when we co-create rules, it feels less like we're being told what to do, and instead we're using our brain to think about the why. And that is really, really good for cognitive development. The other thing is we have to be open to challenging our own beliefs about what is best. And primarily because of what I said earlier, which is our world is changing very rapidly. And so sometimes the beliefs we have don't make sense in today's society anymore, or some of the advice we have or the way we see things. And so being flexible also allows us to kind of be flexible to what our child is learning and being aware of that so we can challenge it. The sooner we start to have important conversations, the sooner we can develop healthy patterns that make it easier to have them. Again, it's never too late to have these conversations or to create this pattern with children, but it can be more difficult, especially if we wait a while or maybe we just haven't fully been able to create that pattern. Some kids are going to be more resistant and uncomfortable with those conversations than others, right? So the sooner we have them, the better. And when we're talking about open communication, we want our children to be honest with us and share how they're really feeling, what they're really thinking, what they're struggling with. And so for that to happen, we really want to think about how we approach conversations, because we are setting the standard for those conversations, right? So trust is really important. Can our child trust the intention of this conversation? So sometimes youth might say, you're just trying to get me in trouble, right? So if our kid thinks we're asking questions so that we can punish them, they might not be as honest with us about what's going on, right? Can our kid trust that the outcome is going to be mutually beneficial, meaning that their opinions are valid, that we're going to listen to that and incorporate it? Or do they think that we're just trying to get them to agree with us, right? That might be kind of our overall goal. We would like if they agreed with us. But if we're just trying to make someone agree with us, it's not really a back and forth conversation, right? And when it's not back and forth, especially as children get older, that can really shut down conversations, right? Because they don't feel like what they say necessarily matters. And also just trust our ability, right? Trust that we're going to be confidential, meaning we're not going to tell all of the family about the things that the kids brought up. And we can be honest about who we need to involve, right? Well, I'm going to have to talk to mom or dad about this for this reason, right? And that brings us to honesty. Be honest about your intention. You can say something like, I went to a webinar tonight and I think we should start having these conversations, right? It could also be that I'm concerned about you because I've noticed a couple things and I want to talk to you about that. So just being honest about what we're doing, why we're doing it, what our concerns are, what the next steps are is really helpful for kids to feel safe, to know what they're expecting. And also, I'll just say, be honest about how we're feeling. When I say to someone, a child especially, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling worried, what we're doing is also modeling for them to how to express emotions in a healthy way. And so sometimes it might feel like our kids don't care how we feel, and they might even tell us that if they're feeling a little defensive. But it doesn't mean we're not showing them really healthy skills in how to talk about it. And then just safety. I want to remind people that safety can be from physical harm, so like their physical body, but emotional safety is where we feel comfortable sharing our ideas without fear of being judged. So I am very guilty of my face doing like right judgmental faces. We want to kind of avoid those. We want to avoid judgmental words, which can be difficult because especially with certain topics, some people are just on red alert right away and might misinterpret it. But we want kids to be able to tell us what they're really thinking and feeling. Also, psychological safety. Can I share ideas and take risks within this relationship? And spiritual safety means, do I have safety expressing my beliefs? And again, these can be beliefs about anything, beliefs about society, about religion, about gender, about where their future is. Are we willing to talk about it, or do we kind of dismiss it, and maybe not even intentionally? Right? So something to think about and maybe even ask about with our kids is, how can we feel safe? How can we build trust? What makes it feel safe to come talk to me? What allows you to trust me telling me this? Those can be helpful conversations, especially if we're just trying to increase that safety or that trust. So always a good reminder that when we model healthy behavior, it sets the standard for what behavior a child can accept. And we do see this in studies. As Tim mentioned, we primarily work with intimate partner violence, and there are clear connections to children who have witnessed or experienced abuse early in life, either repeating that behavior or accepting it from future partners. And so just really conscious to think, how would I want someone in the future to talk to my child about this? Right? What would I feel good about? And that can sometimes help us, because sometimes these conversations are challenging and they're going to challenge our belief systems. So some of our tips, we always explore with curiosity, especially because if our child is saying something that kind of directly contradicts something we believe in, that can be really frustrating and really concerning sometimes for us. But when we explore curiously, we're able to get down to the nitty-gritty and maybe actually help guide them to thinking more critically about some of their beliefs. So we can ask them, like, what does that mean to you? What do you know already about that? What have you heard about being a man? What have you heard about being a woman? Right? What does that mean? We can share our own stories. Story sharing is a really good way to build that trust, because we're sharing a part of ourselves. So maybe we share, I had this experience and this made me feel this way. Has something like that happened to you? We can also ask how they learned about certain things. Is it online? Is it at school? Asking just open-ended questions about their activities to build that confidence in talking about it. And also being curious about their peers, because they are shaping their beliefs as well. And so sometimes it's very helpful to ask what's happening at school, because it might tell us a lot actually about what they're being exposed to. So just some example questions. Why is this activity so important to you? What does it mean to be this to you? So if we use gender, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a boyfriend to you? What does that mean? What do you want me to know about being a gamer? What do you want me to know about being a big brother, right? Does that change how you interact with people? Or we can just go for the, I honestly don't know much about this. Can you tell me about it? Right? Can you educate me on what you know? This is a great way of letting kids kind of take the lead, and also to see where they're coming from without kind of assuming, right? So it really allows us to just start from an open place. So again, letting kids take the lead is very helpful. Depending on their developmental stage and their preferences, they might talk better when they're playing with something. They might talk better at certain times of the day. They might need more time to reflect before they talk to you. So we can let them know we're available to talk when you're ready, right? We can let them know that we can talk in a different way. Maybe we want to do arts while we talk, that kind of thing. And again, choosing words that are age appropriate. So children under 10 tend to struggle with non-concrete things like justice and abuse and power. So this is where we're going to include maybe like stories and examples and feeling words, right? So have you felt alone, right? And then kind of go into that conversation there. Children under 10, this is usually where we can start exploring more complex ideas that aren't physical and able to see. It's always helpful to point out discrepancies in what they believe versus the real world. So we might hear beliefs that are really concerning to us. Tim will give us some examples shortly about some gender ones. So we want to kind of point out, does that make sense for you, right? Do you always do that? Do you always feel that? We can also tell children our concern. Well, I'm concerned about you getting involved with substances, because I've heard people who say that they're a partier, they tend to drink a lot. That's my concern. Can we talk about substances, right? This is probably for our older children, right? And so letting them know the potential risk allows them to think about that risk, mitigating it. And again, maybe co-creating rules. What does it look like to respect each other? What does it look like to listen to each other? Those conversations might feel more like a battle. And if they do, I'd strongly suggest sitting down before we have any of these and saying, okay, we want to have better conversations. What do we both need to do that? How do we respect each other? How do we listen to each other? And also, we encourage you to engage with the content made by creators that are targeting your children's audience. This is because you want to know what's being said and what they're hearing. And you also might want to limit some of the content or engage in a really critical discussion about it. So if we're listening to this and we feel like, what if I didn't do some of these things? What if I made a mistake? It's okay. We can fix it. And the first way to do it is owning up. Hey, the other day when you told me this, I freaked out a little bit, right? That was not cool. That was not okay, however you want to say it. Explain where you were coming from, and you want to focus on, I wanted to help you. I care about you. I was worried about you. Ask them, like, what do I need to know, or ask them to explain information. How do we move forward? And maybe even setting a plan for next time. Okay, next time we talk about this, please don't bring it up while I'm cooking dinner. I can't focus. I want to focus when you're telling me this, right? So we can set those kind of boundaries. And this is probably going to have to happen multiple times, right? The way children are developing, to set a new pattern, we're probably going to have to do it more than once. So don't get discouraged if the first couple times it's not really working. It's about consistently applying it to help them see that. So when we talk about harmful narratives that we want people to be aware of, anything that is justifying violence, physical violence, emotional violence, anything like that is a harmful narrative, right? When we're promoting unhealthy ideas about manhood, about womanhood, about personhood, or we're promoting hate for certain groups. This could be like a group, an ethnic group. This could be a group of people like women or about men. We also want to be cautious of anything that has really, really rigid rules to be accepted. And this, again, could be anything. This could be our religion. This could be our culture. This could be our gender. So if something is rigid, meaning there is no flexibility, it is probably not a healthy belief because, again, our identity is really intersecting and complex. Anything that promotes selfish ideology, as long as it doesn't affect me, I don't care. I don't care if that hurts other people. This is what I wanted. We see that as a direct link to a lot of violent behavior in society. And also anything that kind of promotes us being isolated. You're an outsider. You're a lone wolf. What we're teaching kids is that they don't have a place in society, and that can be really harmful down the road. This last point here is just as we have more information and more types of people and more connections, a lot of youth are struggling to find their identity and a purpose behind it. And that is really what adolescence is about, is finding a purpose that kind of drives us into adulthood and the choices we make. And so when we're trying to find that purpose, but we don't have any guidance, this gets taken over by some really, really unhealthy sources of information to show them the way. And so we are encouraging kids to think really critically about what they engage with, particularly online. So we want to encourage kids, know your values, know your goals, so you can think about what fits and what doesn't. Caution them around buzzwords for clickbait, right? So whenever it's neckbeard, alpha, a waist, don't be a femboy, you want to act like a real man. These are things that are meant to drive division and get a reaction. So it's probably not the best source of information. We also think, what's the agenda of what I'm reading? Everything has an agenda. So always getting our kids to think, what was the purpose of writing this? And is it a good purpose or not so good? And I would also encourage kids to, if you're consuming one type of content, try and look at the other side of that content. So for example, we see a lot of male YouTubers talking about being an alpha male. Well, maybe we also direct them to people who talk about things like equality in relationships, being kind as a man, because then they can get lots of information and decide what fits for them. So I'm going to pass it over to Tim, who's going to go through some of the specific red flags that we see around gender, because again, that is our agency's focus. And this is things that we have seen are impacting clients that we're working with and even their children from what they're telling us.
Thanks so much, Holly. Yeah, so these are definitely the red flags that we would love you to keep real open ears on. Maybe you have a young teenage boy, maybe you have a younger boy, and some of these things are starting to show up. And so, you know, and it's important too, as someone like myself that identifies as a man, how society is really kind of reinforcing that these are some pieces that we already have to either believe or have to be. And so we have to remember that too, that we're seeing this hyper sense of what do we define as being masculine, or how does it mean to be a man, and what does that development look like? So when you're hearing things like really hyper focused on whether that be materialistic or physical pieces, or really putting down, say, women as a whole, I mean, those are the red flags we really want you to pay attention to. So these are the things that we hear all the time, right? From the clients that we serve. I have to be strong. I have to be dominant. I have to be detached, right? I was told that I can't show emotion, right? I was told that I can't cry. There's a beautiful quote that says, you know, as men, we yell at them when they don't talk, but then we shame them often when they do. And it's this notion of, like, you know, this paradox that happens in our society where, you know, how do we create more safe spaces for young boys in particular, feeling that they can have that emotion, that they can express that. You know, someone myself that grew up in a neighborhood that was a pretty violent place, you know, the expectation for me growing up was to be dominant, was to be violent in that way, right? And so how can we really push back on these narratives that says, you know, as young men, you know, that's not the expectation, that's not the standard. How can we remove some of those barriers to create safe spaces, to create more healthy men? So when we hear also this notion of talking down upon women in particular, that weak, that they're weak, they're submissive, right? That there's this notion that they cannot be like as a man, or this notion that I'm a more high valued man, or this is what it means to be a high value man versus a woman. That's where we want to break down those pieces again and talk about, what does equality mean, and what does it mean again to be a future man that can lead and create safety for women and girls in our society. So you know, breaking down kind of the opposite of that, when we talk down upon what it means to actually maybe be a healthy man. And that's the terminology that we are really trying to use at Changing Ways, is what does it mean to be a healthy man, right? That's what we want you to be. We want you to be healthy, and we want you to be safe. And as men, we have tremendous roles in our society to do that, right? We can be leaders in that space. So how do we call more boys and men into this conversation, right? So again, some of these other languages that we're seeing online, right, whether that be increasingly intensive sexual objectification of women, whether it be isolation, something that we really want to pay close attention to with young boys in particular, that may have more of just an online community, or in a really kind of isolated state. That's something that we always want to kind of ask more questions around and be more curious about. Also, this notion too around where we see a lot of young men feeling like whether they're not deserving to be in a relationship, or that women simply don't want to be in a relationship with them, and this hatred starts to form. This missed kind of vision of how women are seen. Again, a very important piece to pick up on. So all of these flags, incredibly important pieces to really keep your ears and eyes open to. And just kind of wrapping up, a big thing is kind of jealousy is such another important red flag, right? If we're seeing high forms of jealousy in young boys in particular, it's something that we definitely want to have conversations around. This notion, again, that they're devaluing themselves, and saying that, you know, I'm not as good as, or I'm better than, right? These polar opposite views of how jealousy comes to be. really important to pick up on. And depending on which end that's coming from, you can really tackle those conversations in different ways. But then there's also the other side of jealousy, which is infatuation. Another piece that is really, again, something to really work to pay attention to, right? This notion that, seeking out that person will solve all those problems. We know that that's not the case. We know we got to look inward. We got to do that work first, right? And I know I'm still on that journey, so it takes some time. It takes some time. So those are really the two pieces that we really want to pay attention to, right? Again, kind of those polar opposites, that jealousy or that infatuation, and control, right? Wherever we start to see that, hey, like, I heard you say that you didn't want your girlfriend to hang out with her friends. Well, what's that about? What's going on there, right? Like these little pieces where we start to see again, kind of this some of these controlling pieces start to come out. It's another way to have a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. And so I know we've thrown a lot of information at you. Please feel free to put things in the chat. Just as I wrap up, I wanted to put these two other resources, and these are fantastic for teens. So that kind of 12 to 18 plus. I would say these are even great for adults. I personally use some of these. Some of them are fun. So the first is loveisrespect.org, which is talking exactly what Tim just said. Love is respect. It's not control. It's not jealousy. It's not domination. So it gives some really amazing information to teens, and it's designed for teens so they can navigate it themselves as well. And this other one, the Healthy Relationship Toolkit, if you use that one, this QR code, it will download a PDF. It's an entire toolkit with activities that teens can do, and a lot of it is based on finding our identity. What do we care about? What do we value? What are we looking for? And how do we accomplish all of those things? So we know this was a lot of information, and really we're hoping this is a starting point to future conversations, and Changing Ways is always here in the community to answer questions. I think I forgot to say it at the start, but I am the Community Engagement and Research Coordinator. You are always welcome to send me an email with questions. We would love to come back and do even more webinars if we're invited. So whatever that looks like, we're always here to support the community and having these conversations, learning about healthy relationships, and supporting parents and just adults wherever they're at. So my information, as well as Tim's, is on this final slide. And we always love to hear from our community about what they need. I don't see any questions in the Q&A at this moment, but if anyone wants to throw one in there, please just note we're kind of coming close to the end of that time. Otherwise, I will pass it back to our moderators.
We could just let you talk and talk and talk. So you have shared so much wonderful information. And Sarah and I are subbing in here, so I apologize if I'm going to ask, like, there might be some handouts that we do send out to participants with your contact. I'm not sure what that is, but if folks want to take a screenshot of that or a picture of their contact information, before we put another one up, go back to ours so we can share our information. Sarah, do you mind doing that? Because I can't talk and do that at the same time. I am not a multitasker. I'll own it. I'm no shame there. I really appreciate all the information that you shared. I have the pleasure of getting to connect with Holly and Tim often, but I'm really glad that they were able to come and share their expertise, and exactly like you've said, to start this conversation. So whatever that looks like moving forward, if you have questions, folks in the audience, to connect with Tim, with Holly, with members of our team, which you will see on the screen in a couple of minutes, and just members of the Safe Schools and Wellbeing team. Within our team, we talk a lot about the essential conditions for learning, and much of what you shared is so in line with that, because we do need to have those relationships, that connection, that safety to and that safety from, so that as a school, as a community, we can be there and support each other and have open, honest communications. So yeah, I really appreciate both of you coming and taking the time, and for all of you that joined us. And I know we've gone a few minutes over, but nobody's leaving yet. So that speaks to how interested people were in hearing what you had to say. So on the screen, there is not my name or Sarah's name, but Cindy Schufelt and Caitlin Chow are two of our team members that organize and run these sessions normally. So if you have any follow-up questions, please connect with them. That's their email addresses. And then if you would like to take a few minutes, we would love to get some feedback on that link, the second link there. And you can just click on the screen and it'll take you to that. And again, if you haven't signed up, but I think everyone in here has had to sign up, you can sign up for future on the mailing list to find out future webinars that we're having and suggest other ones. So maybe there'll be a bunch of saying, we need more Holly and Tim. So then we could get more Holly and Tim coming. And a big thank you in the chat there from one lovely soul. So
Thank you.